Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we will explore the world of coding with simple and fun example. In today's tutorial, we are tackling a classic exercise that helps you sharpen your programming skills across all coding languages. We will discuss pseudocode and flowcharts for a slightly complex problem than the one discussed in the previous video. Moreover, in this video, we will see that once pseudocode and flowchart is ready, we can program the code in any programming language. Stay tuned till the end because we will translate this pseudocode and flowchart to 4 different programming languages, including C, C++, Java, and Python, on a single platform to show the usability and importance of a flowchart. Let's choose the following classic programming problem for today. Write a program that reads an integer n from the user, loops n times, and for each iteration, checks if the number is positive, negative, or 0. Sounds straightforward, right? Let's break it down. Before we dive into coding, it's essential to plan our approach. As discussed in our previous videos, pseudocode is a plan written in steps using plain English language. The first step is to start the program. The second step in this program is to prompt the user to enter a value of n. This value represents the number of iterations that we need for this program. Third step is to initialize a variable named count to 0. This will be our counter, keeping track of the number of iterations of a loop. Fourth step is to get user input for the number, represented as num. This is the number entered by the user to inquire if it is positive, negative, or equals 0. Now we will use an if statement to see if the number is greater than 0. Any statement with if is also known as conditional statement. This kind of statement can be true or it can be false. If num is greater than 0, this condition will represent true and false otherwise. This step says that if the number num is positive, then print that number is positive. The program lands at the sixth step if the fifth step is false. Therefore, if a number is not positive, it could be negative. So this conditional statement will check if the number num is negative. If the number num is negative, program will print that number is negative. Program lands at this step only if the step 5 and step 6 are false. Therefore, if a number is neither positive nor negative, it will be a 0. Thus, this step will directly print that number is 0. As an iteration is completed here, the program will now increment the counter value by adding 1 to it. Now program will check if the updated value of count is less than n or not. If it is less than n, it should again ask the user to input the value of another number that was done in step 4. So, if this condition is true, the program will move to step 4, otherwise it will move to step 10. This step indicates the end of the program. Since we are done with the planning of our program, now we can move towards the translation of this pseudocode in the form of flowchart. Flowchart has the symbols that we will use today. This shape is used of start and end of the program. Parallelogram is used for get input from the user and output on the screen. Rectangle is used for any kind of operation and calculations, like I is equal to 0 or I is equal to I++. Diamond shape is used for conditional statements where condition is present. Like if I is less than n, this is condition. Similarly, if num is less than 0, if num is greater than 0, if num equals 0, these are all conditions. Please remember all these shapes and their functions. Now let's move to the draw.io for making flowchart. It's a fantastic tool for creating clear and effective diagrams. Search draw.io in your browser. Start with a blank canvas or pick a template that fits our needs. On the left side, you will find different shapes. We will keep the pseudocode in front of us and use the shapes. First, select oval shape to start the program. Next, we use parallelogram to input a value for n from user, which will determine the number of iterations. Next, we use rectangle to initialize the counter I to 0, which will keep track of the number of iterations. Again, select parallelogram to ask the user for input a number num. Use diamond shape for condition. If the condition is true, the program will print number is positive. If the condition is false, then the flow moves to the next decision. Again, use diamond shape for next condition. If the condition is true, the program will print number is negative. If the condition is false, then the program will print number is 0. Use rectangle for counter I is incremented by 1. Again, use diamond shape for condition. If condition is true, the program goes back to the step where it gets user input for nm. If condition is false, the program ends. Let's start coding C program after the flowchart is complete. We will use replit as an online compiler. First, create a REPL and select the language, say C programming, and after naming the REPL, creation is completed. Our journey begins with the stdio.h library, your gateway to basic input and output operations in C. This library is like the communication bridge between your program and the real world, enabling functions like printf to display messages and scanf to capture user input. Think of it as the essential toolkit that every C programmer needs. The main function is where all the magic starts. This is the entry point of every C program. When your code runs, it starts here, making main the heart of your program. The int keyword tells the program that it will return an integer value, a signal to the operating system that everything went smoothly. Here we introduce three key players in our program: n, num, and I. These integer variables are the building blocks of our loop. N will determine how many times the loop runs, num will hold the numbers entered by the user, and I will keep track of the loop iterations. Think of them as the tools that will help us categorize numbers as positive, negative, or zero. It's time to get some input. We use printf to ask the user for the value of n, which sets the number of iterations for our loop. This is where the user gets involved, making the program interactive and engaging. Now we capture the user's input with scanf, where the %d tells the program to expect an integer, and the nn directs that input into our variable n. This step is crucial as it lays the foundation for how many numbers the user will enter next. Let the looping begin. This for loop is like a countdown timer, running exactly n times. Starting from I is equal to 1, it increments I with each iteration until it reaches n. The loop ensures that our program asks the user for a number n times, no more, no less. Each time the loop runs, we prompt the user with enter a number. This is where the user gets to input different numbers, keeping the program interactive and dynamic. It's like a mini quiz where the user provides the numbers for evaluation. Just like before, scanf comes into play, capturing the user's input and storing it in the variable num. This is where the real action begins as we start analyzing the numbers. Here's where the decision-making happens. We check if the entered number is positive using an if statement. If num is greater than 0, the program moves to the next step. If the number is positive, we celebrate by printing positive number. This instant feedback keeps the user engaged, letting them know that their input was recognized as a positive value. But what if the number is not positive? We have a backup plan with this else if statement. Here we check if the number is negative. If the number is negative, the program informs the user by printing negative number. This immediate response makes the program interactive and informative. And if the number is neither positive nor negative, meaning it's 0, we catch it with this else block. When the number is 0, we print number is 0, closing the loop on our number classification. It's like solving a puzzle where every piece fits perfectly. Finally, the program ends with return 0, signaling that everything went according to plan. This last step is like waving goodbye to the program, letting the operating system know that the journey was a success. Let's run the code to see the output of the code. Enter the number of times you want to run the loop, say 3. Start entering the numbers. Enter -3 and watch as the program tells you it's a negative number. Enter 0 and the program responds with number is 0. Enter 4 and the program confirms it's a positive number. After 3 iterations, the loop ends and the program completes its task. It's like solving a mystery, one number at a time. This simple yet powerful program shows how loops and conditional statements can be used in C to classify numbers. It's a great example of how user interaction, decision-making, and efficient coding come together to create a dynamic and engaging experience. This exercise not only builds your understanding of control flow but also prepares you for tackling more complex programming challenges in the future. Now we will do the same program using C++ programming. Now let's solve this program using C++ programming language. First, click on Create RAPL and select the programming language, then name the RAPL and click on Create. The RAPL is created and then start coding. The IOStream library provides the necessary definitions for input-output stream objects like cin and cout. These objects allow us to interact with the user by reading inputs and displaying outputs on the console. By including this line, we inform the compiler that we are using the standard namespace, which is where standard C++ library functions and objects like cin, cout, and others are defined. Without this line, we would have to prefix these objects with std, which would make our code more cumbersome. This line defines the start of the main function, which is the entry point of every C++ program. The program execution begins from this function. The init return type indicates that this function returns an integer value to the operating system, typically 0 upon successful completion. Here we declared 2 integer variables. First variable is n. This variable will hold the number of iterations the loop will execute, based on user input. The second int variable is num. This variable will temporarily store each number that the user inputs during each iteration of the loop. Cout is the standard output stream in C++. used to print text to the console. In this line, we are displaying the prompt enter n to the user, asking them to input the number of times they wish the loop to run. The less than operator is used to send this string to the output stream. Cin is the standard input stream in C++, used to read input from the user. Here, we use the greater than operator to extract the user's input and store it in the variable n. This input will determine how many times the upcoming loop will iterate. This line initiates a for loop, which will repeat the enclosed code block n times. Int I is equal to 0. We start by declaring an integer variable I and initializing it to 0. This serves as the loop counter. Then I less than n. The loop continues running as long as I is less than n. If I reaches n, the loop stops. And then I plus plus. After each iteration, the value of I is incremented by 1, ensuring that the loop progresses and eventually terminates. Within the loop, this line prompts the user to enter a number. The message enter a number is displayed during each iteration, guiding the user to provide a new number for processing. The program pauses and waits for the user to input a number. This number is read from the input stream and stored in the variable num. This input will be evaluated in the subsequent conditional statements. This if statement checks if the entered number is positive. The condition num greater than 0 is evaluated. If num is greater than 0, the condition is true and the code block inside this if statement executes. And if num is not greater than 0, the program moves to the next conditional check. If the number is positive, this line prints positive number to the console. The handle is used to insert a new line character, ensuring that the cursor moves to the next line in the console after the message is printed. If the previous condition was false, the program checks this else if condition to see if the number is negative. The condition num less than 0 is evaluated. If num is less than 0, the condition is true, and the code block inside this else if statement executes. If num is not less than 0, the program moves to the final else block. If the number is negative, this line prints negative number to the console. Similar to the previous cout, the handle moves the cursor to the next line after the message is displayed. If neither of the previous conditions were true, that is, the number is neither positive nor negative, the program executes this else block. This can only happen if the number is exactly 0. If the number is 0, this line prints number is 0 to the console. The handle moves the cursor to the next line afterward, just like before. The return 0 statement ends the main function and returns the value 0 to the operating system. In C++, returning 0 typically indicates that the program has executed successfully without any errors. Let's run the code to see the output. Specify the number of times you want the loop to run, for example, 3. Begin entering the numbers, input -3, and the program will notify you that it's a negative number. Input 0 and you will see the program respond with number is 0. Input 4 and the program will acknowledge it as a positive number. After completing 3 iterations, the loop concludes, and the program finishes its task. It's like solving a puzzle, one number at a time. This C++ program prompts the user to input a series of numbers and classifies each as positive, negative, or 0. It begins by asking how many numbers the user wants to input, then iterates through that number of inputs, using conditional statements to determine and display whether each number is positive, negative, or 0. The program effectively demonstrates basic input-output operations. Now we will do the same program using Java programming. First, create a REPL by selecting the language and then naming the REPL and click on Create. We begin by importing the scanner class from the java.util package. This allows our program to capture input from the user through the console. Without this, we would be unable to interact with the user directly. Next, we define the main class. Every Java program must have at least one class, and here we are calling it main. This class will contain our main method, which is the starting point of the program. Here, we define the main method. This is where the execution of the program begins. The method is public, meaning it can be accessed from outside the class. It is static, which allows it to run without creating an instance of the main class. The string args parameter is for any command line arguments that may be passed to the program, although we don't use them here. Inside the main method, we create a new scanner object named scanner. This scanner object will allow us to capture input from the user, specifically from the keyboard. The system.in argument tells the scanner to read input from the standard input stream, which is typically the console. Now we display a prompt to the user using system.out.print. This message asks the user to enter n. Notice that we use print and not println, so the cursor stays on the same line after the message, waiting for the user to enter a value. Here we capture the user's input using scanner.nextInt. This method reads the next integer value that the user types in and stores it in the variable n. This value will dictate how many numbers the user will be prompted to enter in the following steps. We now start a for loop. This loop runs n times, starting with I is equal to 1 and continuing as long as I is less than or equal to n. For each iteration, the variable I is incremented by 1. This loop structure allows us to prompt the user to enter a number n times. Inside the loop, we again use system.out.print to ask the user to enter a number. This prompt will appear for each iteration of the loop, meaning the user will be asked to input a number n times. Next, we capture the user's input again using scanner.nextInt. This time the entered number is stored in a variable called num. We will analyze this number in the next steps to determine whether it's positive, negative, or 0. We now enter an if-else statement. The first condition checks whether the entered number, num, is greater than 0. If this condition is true, we know the number is positive. If the number is positive, we use system.out.println to print positive number. The println method is used here to move the cursor to the next line after printing the message. Next, we use else if to check whether the number is less than 0. If the number is negative, this condition will be true, and the program will follow this branch of the code. If the number is negative, we print negative number to the console using system.out.println, informing the user that their input was negative. If neither of the previous conditions is true, meaning the number is neither greater than 0 nor less than 0, we enter the else block. This block will handle the case when the number is exactly 0. If the number is 0, the program prints number is 0. This message informs the user that their input was exactly 0. After the loop finishes and the user has entered n numbers, we close the scanner using scanner.close. It's important to close the scanner to free up system resources and prevent potential memory leaks. Let's run the code to see the output. Enter how many times you would like the loop to run, for example 3. Start inputting the numbers. Input -3 and the program will display negative number. Enter 0 and you will get the message number is 0. Input 4 and the program will confirm it as a positive number. After running the loop 3 times, the program will complete its task. It's like cracking a code one number at a time. This program efficiently reads a series of numbers and classifies each one as either positive, negative, or 0 based on user input. It utilizes a loop to process multiple entries, ensuring that the user can input a specified number of values. Through simple conditional logic, the program provides immediate feedback on the nature of each number, making it a practical tool for quickly evaluating numerical data. The code is concise, easy to follow, and demonstrates the use of loops, conditional statements, and user interaction in Java. Lastly, we will do the program using the famous Python language. First, we create the REPL using the programming language, and after naming, the REPL is created. Here we start by asking the user how many numbers they want to input. The program waits for the user to enter an integer value, which we store in the variable n. This value determines the number of times the program will loop, meaning it controls how many numbers the program will evaluate. Next, we set up a loop that will run n times. The for loop is used here, and the underscore is a common convention in Python when the loop variable is not actually needed within the loop body. The loop ensures that the next section of code will execute exactly n times. Inside the loop, the program prompts the user to enter a number. This input is converted from a string to an integer and stored in the variable num. The program will analyze this number to determine whether it's positive, negative, or 0. The program first checks if the entered number is greater than 0. If num is positive, it prints the message positive number to let the user know that their input is positive. If the number is not positive, the program then checks if it's less than 0. If num is negative, the program prints negative number to indicate that the user has entered a negative value. Finally, if the number is neither positive nor negative, it must be 0. In this case, the program prints number is 0 to inform the user that they entered 0. The else block handles any cases that are not caught by the previous conditions. Let's run the code to see the output of the code. Determine how many times you would like the loop to run, say 3 times. Start inputting numbers, enter -3 and the program will tell you it's a negative number. Enter 0 and you will get the message number is 0. Enter 4 and the program will identify it as a positive number. Once you have gone through 3 inputs, the loop ends and the program completes its work. This Python program effectively takes an integer n from the user to determine how many numbers they want to input. For each number entered, the program categorizes it as positive, negative, or 0 and displays the corresponding message. By looping n times, the program efficiently handles multiple inputs, providing immediate feedback on the nature of each number. The structure is simple yet powerful, making it easy to understand and apply in various scenarios. We discussed 4 different programming languages doing the same job in this tutorial. Which one is your favorite? Please comment below. If you want more interesting tutorials like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your feedback is key to our improvement.